The steel mask digs into his face. Each breath pulls hot, recycled air through filters that taste of oil and faith. He kneels in mud so toxic it would melt unprotected flesh, yet to him, this is communion. A Krieg soldier loads his laser gun with mechanical precision. His gloved fingers, stained with the blood of brothers he never knew by name, move with practiced efficiency. Not because he wants to live, but because he craves to die. The whistle blows. 10,000 gas-masked figures rise as one from trenches stretching beyond sight. They don't scream battle cries. They advance in eerie silence, like ghosts already dead. Their homeworld burns in their memory. Not with sorrow, but with shame. For the Emperor, he whispers, though no one hears it through his mask. The words aren't a prayer for victory. They're a plea for absolution that can only be purchased with death. In the 40th millennium, loyalty is binary. You serve the God Emperor absolutely, or you are his enemy. There is no middle ground in a galaxy drowning in war. Krieg was once a prosperous industrial world, its sprawling hive cities producing vast quantities of materials for the Imperium's endless wars. The planetary governor's palace gleamed with gold and marble, rising above smog-choked factory districts where billions toiled in his name. But ambition festers in privileged hearts. Colonel Jordan, a high-ranking officer of Krieg's planetary defense force, detected the first whispers of heresy. The planetary governor and his inner circle had begun speaking of independence, of breaking from the Imperium's crushing tithes. Traitors rationalized betrayal with noble words. Freedom, autonomy, progress. The governor spoke of these while preparing to sever Krieg from humanity's empire. The rebellion came swiftly. Manufactorum by manufactorum, district by district, the governor's forces seized control. Loyalist officers were executed publicly, their bodies left hanging from lampposts as warnings. The sickly sweet smell of decay mingled with promethium exhaust as vehicles bearing the governor's new insignia patrolled streets once dedicated to imperial glory. For 500 years, Krieg had served faithfully. In one blood-soaked week, it became an enemy of mankind. Jurton and those still loyal retreated to the sealed fortress of Ferrograd. The thick adamantium walls vibrated constantly from artillery bombardment. Inside, children born into loyalty would never see the sky, growing pale and determined under harsh artificial lights. The governor's propaganda blared from voxcasters throughout the hive cities. The Imperium had abandoned them. The Emperor didn't care. Freedom required sacrifice. But Colonel Jurton knew the truth. There is no freedom from the Emperor's sight. No escape from imperial justice. The only question was whether that justice would come from the stars above or the loyal hearts still beating on Krieg's poisoned surface. What Jurton decided next would forever change not just Krieg, but the very nature of its people. It would create soldiers who don't merely accept death, but hunger for it with religious fervor. For how do you atone for a sin as great as betraying the master of mankind? In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, one army stands apart in their zealotry, not through their faith, but through their shame. The Death Korps of Krieg, an Imperial Guard regiment where each soldier is born with a single purpose: to die. Their homeworld of Krieg was once like any other Imperial planet, until 433-40, when a single act of treachery damned them all. Colonel Jurton, loyal to the Emperor, unleashed atomic fire rather than surrender to secessionists. The planet burned. The survivors descended underground. What emerged centuries later wasn't human, not truly. Krieg had become a world of clones, of men manufactured in vitro. Their growth accelerated to produce soldiers at industrial scale. 8 million Kriegsmen die in the Emperor's wars each year. 8 million more are born to replace them. But numbers alone don't explain the Death Korps. Other regiments die. Only Krieg craves it. The stench of chemical preservatives clings to their uniforms. Behind their faceless gas masks, their skin is pallid, almost translucent. A canvas of blue veins beneath paper-thin flesh. They speak in whispers, when they speak at all. The mechanical rasp of their breathing apparatus is often the only sound they make. Their training begins at age 4. By 10, they've killed their first man, usually a fellow trainee who showed weakness. By 15, they march to war. Their average life expectancy in combat, 15 hours. Their existence is not service, it is penance. For 5,000 years, Krieg has sought absolution for sins committed before its soldiers were even born. Every death is an offering. Every battlefield a cathedral of atonement. Every war a chance to die with purpose. The Departamento Munitorum values them for their unwavering obedience and willingness to sustain casualties that would break other regiments. Imperial commanders deploy them to the most hopeless theaters. Toxic death worlds, demon-infested hellscapes, suicidal charges against overwhelming odds. The Kriegsman accepts these assignments not with resignation, but gratitude. To understand why Krieg soldiers crave death requires understanding a culture built entirely around generational guilt. A people who believe their very existence is heresy, whose only path to redemption lies through sacrifice. In the vast archives of imperial atrocity, the Death Korps stands unique, not for their brutality, but for turning that brutality inward. They are both perpetrator and victim, executioner and condemned. But beneath the doctrine of atonement lies a darker truth, one the Imperium doesn't want known, one that explains why these faceless men march so willingly into oblivion, why their commanding officers carry weapons not to kill the enemy, but to execute any soldier who survives when death was expected. This is the story of a planet that committed the ultimate sin and created something inhuman to pay for it. A regiment that doesn't fear death because they were never truly alive. But the true horror of Krieg isn't what Colonel Yurton did to his world. It's what he did to its soul. On Krieg, death isn't feared. It's measured, counted, and spent like ammunition. In the sulfur-choked training grounds of Krieg, Guardsman Doric kneels in the toxic mud, his rebreather hissing with each labored breath. The weight of his greatcoat, heavy with chemical residue, presses down like the shame of his ancestors. Around him, 1,000 identical masks stare forward, emotionless lenses gleaming in the sickly yellow light filtering through poison clouds. Your lives are worthless. The drill abbot's voice crackles through a voxcaster. Only in death can you begin to repay the debt. The debt, always the debt. Every child born on Krieg is taught that they exist in a state of cosmic deficit. Their world betrayed the Emperor once, and that betrayal carries a price no generation can fully repay. The scent of guilt permeates deeper than the chemical burns on their skin. In the barracks at night, Doric witnesses the ritual that outsiders never see. Guardsmen unwrap small cloths containing finger bones, relics of their dead comrades. They press these fragments to their foreheads, whispering tallies of the fallen. Each bone represents a fractional payment toward redemption. This is the dark machinery of Krieg psychology, a cult of sacrifice engineered with cold precision by imperial authorities. Every Death Korps soldier is psycho-conditioned from birth to see themselves not as individuals, but as installment payments on an eternal debt. The true horror, confides Commissar Vartan in classified Imperial records, is that we've created a force that requires no commissars to maintain morale. They execute their own for showing survival instinct. When a Krieg regiment receives deployment orders, the temperature in the barracks drops noticeably. Not from fear, but from anticipation. The rhythmic sound of thousands of bayonets being sharpened creates a metallic symphony that echoes through the bunkers. Doric watches his squad mates meticulously prepare their equipment, fingers moving with reverent precision. They aren't preparing for battle. They're preparing for communion. We are the currency of the Emperor's forgiveness, whispers the soldier beside him, voice muffled behind his mask as he loads his laser gun. Each death reduces the debt. What Imperial authorities discovered, what they've carefully cultivated, is that Krieg's obsession with death isn't merely cultural, it's mathematical. In recovered journals of Krieg officers, death tallies are recorded with the same precision as ammunition expenditures. Casualties aren't losses, they're transactions. The most closely guarded secret of the Death Korps' creation is that their infamous death wish isn't a psychological flaw. It's the intended feature. Imperial janitors and psycho-conditioners spent generations perfecting this living weapon. Soldiers who experience endorphin release when contemplating their own deaths in service. Doric feels it now as they march toward the embarkation docks. That familiar warmth spreading through his chest at the thought of dying in the Emperor's name. His heart rate slows. His breathing steadies. But what the Imperium never anticipated was how the Death Korps would evolve this conditioning into something far more dangerous than mere suicidal obedience. They had created the perfect soldiers, but at what cost to humanity itself? The Imperial Guard has always been expendable. But the Death Korps of Krieg? They're something else entirely. A weapon sharpened by shame and forged in self-hatred. High Lords of Terra whisper that for every 10,000 guardsmen who die in battle, perhaps one Space Marine is spared. The arithmetic of death is brutally simple in the Imperium. But what happens when soldiers don't just accept death, they hunger for it? The Departamento Munitorum knows. They've calculated the exact value of Krieg's death cult. Each Kriegsman costs 85% less to deploy than a standard guardsman. Not because their equipment is cheaper, their hellguns and carapace armor are actually superior, but because they require virtually no morale infrastructure. No chaplains to bolster faith. No commissars to prevent desertion. No entertainment. No comfort rations. No medical evacuation quotas. The bitter tang of chemical warfare becomes their perfume. The icy bite of rebreather air becomes more familiar than clean oxygen. The Imperium doesn't just tolerate the Krieg death cult, it actively cultivates it. In the flickering glow of data slates, Munitorum logistics officers quietly adjust deployment schedules. When a campaign needs bodies that won't break under any pressure, they send for Krieg. The metallic scratch of stylus on screen seals the fate of thousands. Send the Death Korps to the radiation zones. They'll advance without complaint. The Imperium's internal propaganda never showcases Krieg's suicidal charges. Their death worship remains a carefully managed secret, useful, but never to be celebrated openly. The cold calculation makes the skin crawl. An entire culture's trauma weaponized by bureaucrats who never set foot on a battlefield. On the blood-soaked training grounds of Krieg, children learn to march before they can run. They're taught that their lives belong to the Emperor, from their first breath. The constant hiss of gas masks becomes the lullaby of their childhood. Their skin never feels sunlight, only the abrasive scrape of uniform fabric and the chemical burn of decontamination showers. Commissar Yarrick once remarked that other regiments fight because they fear their commissars more than the enemy. But the Death Korps? They fight because they fear living more than dying. The Imperium needs this madness. With our countless fronts across 1,000,000 worlds, the Administratum has determined that conventional morale systems cannot sustain the required casualty rates. The math is as cold as the void. Regiments that embrace death require 78% fewer reinforcements to maintain fighting strength. Each Krieg soldier represents 5.4 standard guardsmen in operational value. Not in combat effectiveness, but in their willingness to die without hesitation. The most disturbing truth? Other Imperial commanders have begun requesting Krieg training officers. The death cult is spreading, whispered as a solution to manpower shortages across the Imperium. But there's something the Departamento Munitorum doesn't understand about Krieg's obsession with death. Something darker than mere utility. Something that makes even hardened inquisitors pause when they review the classified reports. What if the Krieg aren't seeking redemption at all? The air on Krieg had always tasted of metal and ambition. But Colonel Jerton could only taste ash now as he stood in the underground command bunker, his fingers hovering over the activation runes. "The High Lords have abandoned us to the traitors," whispered his second-in-command, voice trembling. "We should surrender, while terms might still be negotiated." Jerton's eyes never left the console. The rebellion had consumed Krieg for 17 years. 17 years of the planet's resources diverted from Imperial tithes. 17 years of betrayal against the God Emperor himself. The loyal minority had been pushed back to this final stronghold. "There is no negotiation with heresy," Jerton said, his voice hollow as the bunker around them. "There is only atonement." The atomic arsenal beneath Krieg had been assembled in secret over decades. Not even the rebel leadership knew of its existence. 500 warheads, each capable of turning a hive spire into radioactive glass. Jerton pressed his palm against the authentication scanner. Blood-red light washed over his face as the machine spirit accepted his genetic code. The bunker's lighting shifted to emergency crimson, bathing the officers in the color of slaughter, in the Emperor's name. He whispered, and pressed the execution rune. 1,000 kilometers away, the first detonation blossomed like an artificial sun. The shockwave flattened hive structures built to withstand orbital bombardment. The heat vaporized flesh before screams could form. Then the second warhead. The third. The fourth. Jerton watched through remote pict feeds as his world died. The feeds cut out one by one as radiation scrambled their signals. Static replaced the images of destruction. But Jerton could still see it all behind his eyelids. "What have you done?" screamed his second, hands clawing at his own face. "Billions, billions of souls." "I have saved Krieg for the Imperium," Jerton replied, his voice devoid of doubt. "The flesh is weak, the planet remains. The nuclear fire scoured Krieg's surface for 500 years. The sized survivors, those loyal to the Imperium who had hidden in the deepest bunkers, emerged into a wasteland of radiation and toxic dust storms. Every breath became a struggle. Every child born deformed was evidence of their ancestors' sin. This was the crucible that forged the Death Korps. The survivors taught their children that life itself was the Emperor's currency, to be spent without hesitation. that each Krieger carried the weight of ancestral betrayal, that only through death in service could the sin be washed clean. Generation after generation, the children of Krieg were born into a culture that saw life as a burden to be discarded at the first opportunity for glory. Their training began before they could walk. Gas masks became more familiar than their mothers' faces. Death is the only atonement. The drill abbots would whisper to the children in the dark, "Your ancestors betrayed the Emperor. Your life exists only to pay that debt." But the true horror of Krieg was not what Colonel Jerton had done. It was what came after. For what kind of society would emerge from nuclear fire that sees death not as tragedy, but as salvation? The Emperor's light falls dimly on Krieg, filtered through a perpetual haze of radioactive dust. In the underground bunkers where young Kriegers are raised, Imperial priests move between rows of children, their crimson robes rustling against the cold ferrocrete floors. "Your ancestors betrayed the Emperor." A priest intones, voice amplified by his skull-shaped rebreather. "Their sin is yours to bear." The children sit motionless, backs straight, eyes forward, already soldiers at age 6. The bitter tang of disinfectant barely masks the metallic smell of recycled air that has passed through 1,000 lungs before theirs. "The debt of Krieg can never be repaid," continues the priest, his augmetic eye whirring as it focuses on each child's face. "But through death in his service, you may begin to atone." This is not standard Imperial doctrine. On most worlds, the ecclesiarchy preaches salvation through faith and service. But on Krieg, something twisted has taken root. A deliberate perversion of Imperial teaching crafted by Colonel Jerton's successors. In the flickering light of glow globes, the children watch picked recordings of glorious deaths. Krieg soldiers throwing themselves onto enemy weapons, charging into certain doom, their final moments captured for this very purpose. "Look upon the blessed," whispers the priest. "They die without fear. They die without regret. They die in payment of our debt." What the children don't know, what no living Krieger knows, is that Imperial authorities discovered this doctrinal deviation in 433.M41. Inquisitorial records, sealed at the highest levels, reveal the truth. The Departamento Munitorum made a calculated decision to allow this heretical teaching to continue. Subject populations exhibiting death drive tendencies produce superior assault troops. Reads the classified document. Mortality rates of 94% are acceptable given production capabilities of Vitae womb facilities. The children of Krieg aren't merely indoctrinated. They are being deliberately programmed for self-destruction by the very Imperium they worship. Each night, they sleep in coffin-like bunks, the sound of dripping water a metronome counting down their shortened lives. Each morning, they wake to recite the Litany of Atonement. "My life is the Emperor's currency. May he spend it well." By age 10, many Kriegers have already internalized their purpose so completely that they view survival as a form of failure. Commissars assigned to Death Korps regiments report a unique phenomenon. They execute fewer Kriegers for cowardice than in any other regiment, but more for reckless endangerment of valuable equipment. "They throw away their lives too easily," complained one commissar in his quarterly report. "They must understand that their deaths must be efficient." The most disturbing revelation came from Magos biologist Harren Zvek, who examined the brains of fallen Kriegers. His findings, suppressed by order of Lord Militant Riken, showed evidence of neurological alterations consistent with chemical conditioning. The Death Korps soldiers don't just crave death because of doctrine. They've been physically rewired to experience pleasure at the moment of self-sacrifice. But why would the Imperium go to such lengths with this single regiment? The answer lies buried in a vault beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, in a document bearing the seal of the High Lords themselves. The truth about Krieg's soldiers begins not on the battlefield, but in the sterile darkness of what the Departamento Munitorum euphemistically calls accelerated reproduction facilities. The real name whispered by those who know better. Vitae wombs. These vast industrial complexes stretch for kilometers beneath Krieg's blasted surface, humming with the mechanical precision of assembly lines. But they don't produce weapons or vehicles. They produce people, soldiers, by the millions. The air inside reeks of amniotic fluid and disinfectant, a sickly sweet cocktail that would make even hardened medici personnel gag. Temperature regulated to the precise degree needed for optimal gestation, these facilities are kept in perpetual twilight, bathed in the sickly green glow of monitoring screens. Within these halls, row upon row of artificial wombs pulse with human life. Not natural life, engineered life. Each developing Krieger is genetically modified before conception, their very DNA coded for compliance, endurance, and an unnatural tolerance for pain. The soft, wet sounds of their development are accompanied by the constant hiss of nutrient feeds and the rhythmic beep of monitoring equipment. But the most disturbing aspect isn't the technology itself. It's the purpose. From the moment of artificial conception, these humans are created with a single destiny: to die for the Emperor. Not just to serve, to die. Their entire existence is predicated on their expendability. Unlike natural-born humans who must be indoctrinated to accept death, Krieg's soldiers emerge from their artificial wombs already spiritually hollow. Commissar Vaden's classified reports describe it as a void where the survival instinct should be. When the gestation period completes, artificially accelerated to just 7 months, the vitae wombs split open with a nauseating sucking sound. The pale, trembling forms that spill forth aren't truly children. They're weapons with a pulse. Think about that. While other imperial citizens are born into families, held in their mother's arms, these beings' first sensation is the cold metal of an assembly line. Their first breath filled not with a parent's scent, but with industrial chemicals. And what follows is worse. From their first conscious moments, they're subjected to a relentless regimen of hypno-conditioning. The metallic taste of neural jacks floods their mouths as knowledge is force-fed directly into their developing brains. Pain becomes their teacher. Failure means recycling, a clinical euphemism for execution and biological reprocessing. By age 5, they can field strip a laser gun. By 10, they've killed their first living creature. By 15, they march in perfect unison toward transport ships, ready for war. The Imperium justifies this abomination as necessary. Krieg must repay its debt of treason with bodies. But the truth is darker. The Death Korps are not just willing to die, they're engineered to crave it. Inquisitor Vale's suppressed report put it most chillingly. They don't fear death because they've never truly been alive. But even this industrial-scale horror pales compared to what happens when these manufactured soldiers reach the training grounds. Where the true breaking begins, on Krieg, death is not feared. It's their most sacred transaction. Every lasgun shot, every bayonet thrust, every final breath exhaled through the rubber filters of their masks. These are not sacrifices. They are payments. Installments on a debt that can never truly be cleared. The debt of existence, as Commissar Varick's journals describe, weighs heavier on Krieg's shoulders than any other imperial world. The acrid smell of chemical fog that permeates their training grounds serves as a constant reminder of their ancestors' treachery. The Kriegers don't just accept death. They pursue it with the cold, mechanical precision of accountants tallying figures in a ledger stained with blood and ash. But here lies the dark revelation that the Departamento Munitorum keeps from the wider Imperium. The Krieg Regiment's obsession with death isn't merely about atonement. It's about power. In the shattered ruins of Training Ground Epsilon 19, young Krieg soldiers are taught from their first conscious moments that their lives hold no intrinsic value. The only worth they possess is in how they spend their death. Death is the Emperor's currency. Drill abbots rasp through their rebreathers, the metallic taste of recycled air filling the recruits' mouths. And you must ensure he receives proper payment. The sound of thousands of boots stomping in perfect unison echoes across the blasted wastelands, a metronome counting down to extinction. But what the Imperium never expected was how the Kriegers would transform this punishment into power. What began as penance evolved into something far more disturbing. The truth, recovered from sealed inquisitorial records, is that Krieg soldiers don't simply crave death as atonement. They have weaponized their own expendability. "We are not dying for the Emperor," confessed Death Korps Lieutenant Karis to Inquisitor Vale before his execution for heretical thoughts. "We are dying to become him." The temperature drops as this revelation settles. Every Krieger believes that in perfect, unquestioning sacrifice, they achieve a fraction of the Emperor's divinity. Their deaths aren't just payments. They're investments in apotheosis. Where other Imperial citizens fear the void, Kriegers see transcendence. The rough texture of their greatcoats, deliberately designed to chafe and create discomfort, isn't punishment. It's preparation for shedding the prison of flesh. But who are the real victims in this grotesque economy of death? The Kriegers who march willingly into oblivion? Or an Imperium that has engineered the perfect expendable soldiers by turning self-destruction into a form of worship? Perhaps, as Lord Commander Militant Slido once observed, after witnessing a Krieg regiment advance through a rad zone without hesitation, "We should fear most those who have nothing to lose but their chains." The Departamento Munitorum celebrates the Death Korps as paragons of imperial sacrifice. But have they considered what happens when those who worship death begin to see themselves as its masters? The galaxy trembles at the thought. But the true horror of Krieg isn't what they've become. It's what the Imperium made them to be. The steel doors of the archive vault grind open, revealing data slates untouched for millennia. These records, classified beyond even inquisitorial clearance, tell the truth about Krieg's death cult. It began with betrayal. Colonel Jerton, the man history calls savior, stood in his command bunker as the planet burned in civil war. The rebellion against the Imperium had consumed Krieg for 1,121 days. Hive cities blazed. Billions had already perished. What makes a man choose extinction over defeat? Whispers the archivist, his augmetic eye whirring as it scans the ancient text. Jerton's decision came not from loyalty, but from shame. The records show his family had initially supported the rebellion. His own brother led the separatist forces. Jerton's subsequent loyalty was not devotion. It was overcompensation. The bunker walls were cold against his palms as he entered the final authorization code. The nuclear arsenal, 12,000 warheads, would cleanse Krieg of rebellion. And his personal sin, "Emperor, forgive me," he whispered. But the truth was darker. He didn't want forgiveness. He wanted punishment. The missiles launched. The world burned. Nuclear fire consumed Krieg's atmosphere. The sky became a churning mass of radioactive storms that tore flesh from bone. Those who survived the initial blasts faced something worse. Living, the radiation melted organs from the inside. Children's skin sloughed off in sheets. The lucky died quickly. The rest lingered for weeks, their screams echoing through the ruins until their vocal cords dissolved. But the true horror was psychological. The survivors knew they had brought this upon themselves. Their rebellion had forced this punishment. Every painful breath was deserved. Every child born with mutations was evidence of their sin. This is where the death cult began, not from imperial propaganda, but from collective trauma so profound it rewired their cultural DNA. The first generation of survivors taught their children they were born in sin, that their very existence was an offense to the emperor, that only through death in his service could they be cleansed. The records show something the Imperium has hidden for millennia. The Krieg regiments weren't created by imperial decree. The survivors begged to serve as cannon fodder. They demanded the right to die. When the first Krieg soldiers marched to war, they carried more than laser guns. They carried the crushing weight of ancestral guilt. The gas masks weren't just protection. They were penance, forcing each breath to be labored, a reminder of their unworthiness to breathe the Emperor's air. The archivist closes the file, his hands trembling. The Imperium didn't create death-seeking soldiers, he whispers. They merely weaponized a population's suicidal guilt. The most disturbing revelation appears on the final page. Psychological evaluations of Krieg recruits. They don't fear death because they don't believe they're alive. They consider themselves already dead, walking corpses animated solely by the need for atonement. And the most chilling truth? The Imperium's eugenics programs deliberately amplify these traits with each generation. The Krieg don't crave death. They crave forgiveness they believe can never come. In the sterile depths beneath Krieg's surface, a crimson glow bathes the chamber in bloody light. Row upon row of glass cylinders stretch into darkness, each containing a human form suspended in viscous fluid. These are not children being born. They are soldiers being manufactured. The Vitae womb facilities of Krieg hum with mechanical precision. The air tastes metallic, recycled 1,000 times, with undertones of antiseptic chemicals that burn the nostrils. A tech priest moves between the tanks, his augmented eyes scanning biometric readouts with cold efficiency. Batch 7 Delta shows optimal gene sequencing. He notes to his assistant. Increase production by 30%. Each tank contains a future Death Korps soldier. But what separates these clones from other Imperial regiments is not just their genetic template. It's what's being fed directly into their developing brains. Through neural implants, these unborn soldiers receive their first taste of indoctrination. The subliminal programming seeps into their forming consciousness like poison, carrying one overwhelming message. Your life is worthless except in death for the Emperor. The process is brutally efficient. For every 1,000 Vitae-born soldiers, the Departamento Munitorum receives 970 combat-ready troops. The remaining 30? Failed specimens, discarded without ceremony. A senior officer observes from a gantry above, her breath fogging in the chill air. How long until the new batch is ready for conditioning? She asks. 3 months, Colonel. We've accelerated growth hormones by 17%. The true horror of Krieg isn't just that they die willingly. It's that they were never given a choice to begin with. Once decanted from their artificial wombs, the real conditioning begins. In training facilities carved from Krieg's irradiated bedrock, these clone soldiers learn to embrace suffering. Pain becomes their companion, fear their enemy, and death their ultimate purpose. A drill abbot paces before a line of identical young men, each standing at rigid attention despite the biting cold of the chamber. Their breath creates small clouds that dissipate in the dim light. You exist for one purpose. His voice echoes against stone walls. To pay the debt of our ancestors. To die standing where the Emperor wills it. The soldier's eyes remain fixed forward, unblinking. Not a single muscle twitches in protest. In their barracks, these soldiers sleep in coffin-like compartments. They call them rehearsal caskets. Each night they practice for death, lying motionless in the dark, breathing the stale air, imagining their final sacrifice. The most disturbing truth is what happens to those who show too much individuality or question their purpose. They disappear in the night, their names erased from the regimental logs. Their bodies are recycled, protein matter too valuable to waste in a resource-starved world. The Death Korps don't fear death because death has been coded into their very DNA. Their desire for martyrdom isn't courage, it's psychological conditioning so thorough it rewired their capacity for self-preservation. But what happens when this perfect system of control encounters something it never anticipated? A Krieger who begins to question why he craves his own destruction. In the dim glow of chapel bunkers beneath Krieg's toxic surface, children kneel on cold rockcrete floors until their knees bleed. The metallic scent of blood mingles with incense as they recite their catechisms of atonement. The sin of our forefathers can only be washed away through sacrifice. Drones the priest, his augmetic voice box creating a hollow, scratching echo that burrows into young minds. The Emperor's mercy comes only to those who die in his service. This is not standard imperial doctrine. This is theological corruption, a deliberate warping of imperial faith designed to create soldiers who don't merely accept death, but actively seek it. The ecclesiarchy, the imperial church, maintains a special presence on Krieg, unlike any other world. Here, priests don't just preach duty and sacrifice. They have systematically engineered a death cult wrapped in imperial iconography. Where standard imperial creed teaches that the emperor protects, Krieg's doctrine teaches that the emperor forgives only through blood. Consider the standard prayer of the Krieg child. My life is guilt, my death is atonement. 10 words that encapsulate a theological perversion so complete that it transforms self-preservation into sin. The most insidious aspect is the doctrine of generational guilt. While the imperial creed teaches personal responsibility, Krieg's twisted version insists that every citizen carries the full weight of their ancestors' treason. The rebellion ended over 500 years ago. Yet every child born today enters the world already condemned. Archival picked footage shows Krieg preachers moving among trenches during battle. Not to comfort the wounded, but to remind the dying that their suffering is insufficient. Only in death does duty end. They whisper to men with missing limbs and punctured lungs. But atonement requires more. The psychological impact is devastating. Survivors of battles often report feelings of shame rather than relief. Medals and commendations are received with bowed heads and whispered apologies for living when others died. This theological corruption extends to Krieg's interpretation of imperial saints. Where most worlds celebrate saints' miracles and wisdom, Krieg venerates only their suffering. Chapel walls display not scenes of triumph, but detailed renderings of martyrdom. saints being flayed, burned, dismembered, each death presented as the moment of true glory. The Death Korps' infamous battle cry, "For Krieg and Atonement," reveals the truth that Imperial authorities prefer to ignore. These are not soldiers fighting for victory, but penitents seeking absolution through annihilation. This deliberate theological manipulation serves the Imperium well. It creates regiments that never retreat, never surrender, and never question orders that will lead to certain death. But at what cost to humanity? The most chilling evidence comes from Commissar Varick's suppressed report after the cleansing of Radnar. "They do not fight like men defending their Imperium," he wrote. "They fight like souls trying to earn their way into heaven." But what happens when a faith built on death confronts an enemy that offers eternal life? The Kriegsman kneels in the mud, his gas mask pressed against the cold metal of his lasgun. Around him, the battlefield has gone silent. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but the temporary absence of artillery that feels almost deafening in itself. "We are born guilty," the Commissar had told them during indoctrination. "Every breath you take is borrowed. Every heartbeat is stolen." The truth that the Imperium obscures about Krieg is not merely that they rebelled. It's that their redemption is mathematically impossible. Imperial accountants have calculated the debt, 5.2 trillion lives owed to the Emperor for their heresy. A number so vast it transforms from statistic to theology. Every Krieg soldier carries a small booklet beneath their greatcoat. Inside, meticulously inked figures track their personal tally: enemies killed, wounds sustained, missions completed. Not as commendations, but as installments on an unpayable loan. Across the trench line, a guardsman from Cadia watches the Kriegsman with unease. The Death Korps don't celebrate victories. They merely nod, reload, and advance. Their hunger for death isn't courage, it's accounting. They're like walking corpses, the Cadian whispers to his squad mate. Like they're already dead. He's more right than he knows. The secret horror of Krieg isn't found in their training facilities or even their infamous clone factories. It's in the psycho-conditioning chambers where each soldier is neurologically rewired to experience something beyond pain, beyond duty. Shame so profound, it becomes metabolic, guilt encoded at the cellular level. The Kriegsman rises now, fingers tracing the regimental number etched into his mask, the number that replaced his name, his identity reduced to a production badge. Humanity distilled to its utilitarian essence. Behind those dark eyepieces, his pupils dilate not from fear, but anticipation. The Death Korps' obsession with martyrdom isn't heroism. It's the desperate mathematics of atonement. Each death in service is calculated, processed, deducted from the cosmic ledger. One more payment toward a debt that can never be cleared. The imperial truth teaches that the Emperor protects. But on Krieg, they know better. The Emperor judges, and they have been weighed and found wanting. This is why Kriegsmen volunteer for suicide missions with mechanical efficiency. Why they march into certain death without hesitation. Not because they are brave, but because they are bankrupt souls making minimum payments on an infinite moral mortgage. The whistle blows. The Kriegsman chambers around, across no man's land. Enemy guns glint in the pale light. 10,000 barrels aimed at the trench line. The odds of survival, 0. The Kriegsmen feel something almost like peace. But here lies the darkest truth of all, the revelation that the Imperium keeps even from the Kriegsmen themselves. The ledger is a lie. The debt was fabricated to create the perfect expendable soldier, their suffering engineered as carefully as their gas masks. The truth wouldn't set them free. It would destroy them entirely. The whistle blows again. The Kriegsman rises, but what if he knew? What if they all knew their damnation was just another imperial fiction? Would they still crave death so desperately then? Every Krieg child is born into debt, a debt of blood, honor, and penance. In the dim, incense-heavy chambers beneath Krieg's hive cities, the young are gathered weekly. Their small bodies shiver in the cold as they kneel on bare rockcrete, knees bleeding through thin fabric. This is their first lesson in pain's virtue. Your ancestors betrayed the Emperor, intones the black-masked priest, voice amplified by his rebreather's metallic rasp. Their sin flows in your veins. The children's eyes remain downcast, as they've been taught. To look up is to claim worthiness they do not possess. The acrid smell of industrial chemicals mingles with ceremonial incense, Krieg's unique perfume of penitence. How do we repay such a debt? The priest asks. 100 small voices answer in perfect unison. Only in death does duty end, but what outsiders fail to understand is that this is not mere indoctrination. It is Krieg's psychological survival mechanism. After Colonel Yurton detonated the atomic weapons that scoured Krieg's surface in 433.M40, the survivors faced an existential crisis. How does a culture continue after committing near suicide? How do you build identity from radioactive ashes? The answer came in the form of a theological innovation: generational guilt as salvation. In the flickering glow of radiation-resistant lumens, the children are shown picked captures of Krieg before the destruction. Gleaming spires, verdant fields, a paradise betrayed. Then come the images after. The 3-century nuclear winter, the billions dead, the surface rendered uninhabitable for millennia. This, the priest's voice cracks with genuine emotion, is what we did to ourselves. The weight of this history crushes young psyches before they can fully form. By age 10, a Krieg child has internalized a guilt so profound that death in service becomes not just duty, but psychological relief. Every night in their dormitories, children perform the ritual of unworthiness. They cut their palms with ceremonial blades, pressing bloody handprints to the wall while reciting, "My life is currency for our redemption." The Departamento Munitorum officially discourages such practices. Unofficially, they recognize its battlefield value. No other Imperial Guard regiment shows such disregard for self-preservation. No other soldiers advance through artillery barrages without flinching, or volunteer for suicide missions with something approaching eagerness. Psychologists in the Schola Progenium, who've studied Krieg's indoctrination methods, speak of weaponized guilt, turning self-hatred into tactical advantage. This is why Krieg's soldiers don't fear death. They crave it. Each fallen comrade is envied, not mourned. Each battlefield is not a place of potential death, but of potential redemption. In the irradiated wasteland that was once Krieg's capital, a single monument stands, not to heroes or victories, but to failure. Inscribed upon it in High Gothic is a single line: 10,000 years of service will not erase a single day of betrayal. But the darkest truth? The Imperium has discovered that this guilt complex can be manufactured anywhere. And they're taking notes. How many other worlds might benefit from a population that begs for death? The cold blue light of Krieg's underground facilities casts long shadows across the endless rows of glass chambers. Inside each, a human form floats suspended in amniotic fluid, not a child growing naturally, but a soldier being manufactured. This is the Vitae Womb complex, the heartbeat of Krieg's dark resurrection. The air here tastes of antiseptic and ozone, the mechanical hiss of life support systems providing a constant, unsettling rhythm. Each Kriegsman isn't born, they're decanted. Their first sensation isn't a mother's warmth, but the sting of cold metal against newly formed skin. From their first conscious moment, death isn't something to fear. It's their inheritance. The conditioning begins before consciousness. Neural implants whisper the same message into developing minds. Your life is borrowed. Your death is owed. The Emperor's mercy has a price. Amagos Biologies once documented the process, his mechanically enhanced voice betraying rare emotion. They engineer devotion at the molecular level. The brain chemistry of a Krieg soldier experiences religious ecstasy at the thought of self-sacrifice. They feel pain as other humans do. They bleed as others bleed. But where most recoil from suffering, the Krieg soldier leans into it, each wound a step closer to redemption. The temperature in the conditioning chambers is kept precisely 5 degrees below comfort. Even in gestation, they learn. Comfort is not your birthright. By the time they march from the facilities in their identical greatcoats, gas masks permanently affixed, the transformation is complete. The death wish isn't psychological damage. It's their primary operating system. An inquisitor who studied the Krieg phenomenon wrote, "They have weaponized shame, an entire culture built on the architecture of atonement." What makes this revelation truly haunting is the efficiency. The Death Korps produces soldiers who don't just accept death. They pursue it with mathematical precision, calculating the highest value exchange rate for their sacrifice. They are the Imperium's perfect expendable resource. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where human life has never been cheaper, the Krieg soldier represents the ultimate commodification of humanity, a being manufactured specifically to desire its own destruction. The greatest horror isn't that they die by the millions. It's that somewhere deep in their engineered souls, they welcome it. And so we must ask ourselves, in our world of increasingly disposable humanity, how far are we from creating our own versions of Krieg? Where do we draw the line between sacrifice and exploitation? Perhaps the Death Korps' greatest lesson isn't about warfare at all, but about what happens when redemption becomes industrialized. The gas mask isn't just to filter toxic air. It's to hide the face of a species that has weaponized its own guilt. If this glimpse into the darkness of humanity's future disturbs you, perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Subscribe now and join us in exploring the shadows where truth hides. After all, in understanding monstrosity, we define our humanity. The Imperium doesn't just tolerate Krieg's death cult. It nurtures it, cultivates it, weaponizes it. In the cold corridors of Terra's administrative hives, data scribes tally the efficiency of regiments. The Death Korps consistently outperforms all other human forces in suicide missions by 73%, according to Departamento Munitorum statistics. Their willingness to die translates to tactical advantages no other regiment can provide. The stench of pragmatism hangs heavier than Prometheum exhaust. High lords and generals speak in whispers about the Krieg solution when discussing impossible objectives. The metallic taste of blood economy lingers in their mouths as they sign deployment orders. This is the Imperium's darkest secret. They need men who want to die. The grind of artillery and the screams of the dying create a symphony the Imperium conducts with practiced hands. Every Death Korps soldier who throws himself into certain death is one less space marine needed, one less valuable asset expended. But the truth cuts deeper still. The ecclesiarchy knows. The priests understand that the Death Korps' obsession isn't just useful, it's replicable. The dust-choked prayer halls of Krieg have become laboratories for cultivating the perfect psychological weapon. Humans who crave annihilation as redemption. Commissars report the unsettling whispers that pass between Krieg's men in their trenches. Not plans for survival, but competitive murmurs about who will achieve death first. The sound of gas masks hissing in anticipation when suicide missions are announced. The Imperium has discovered something horrifying. Guilt is more powerful than indoctrination. In the flickering light of strategy rooms, Imperial commanders have learned that no amount of propaganda can match the motivational power of genuine self-hatred. The cold calculus is undeniable. The Death Korps' need for atonement makes them the most reliable soldiers in the galaxy. And here lies the most chilling revelation. Documents recovered from sealed inquisitorial archives suggest experimental programs to replicate Krieg's nuclear devastation on other worlds, showing signs of rebellion. The texture of these parchments, yellowed and crumbling, cannot hide the clinical language describing post-catastrophe psychological weaponization. The Imperium doesn't just use Krieg's death cult. It has plans to manufacture more. So we must ask ourselves, in a galaxy of horrors, what does it say about humanity that our greatest weapon isn't our technology, our faith, or even our transhuman warriors, but our capacity for self-punishment? Every trench dug by Krieg's shovel is a monument to mankind's darkest potential. Our ability to transform guilt into annihilation, to make death not just acceptable, but desirable. What have we become when we worship at the altar of our own destruction? If you felt the cold realization of the Imperium's true nature seeping into your bones, then join us as we continue to excavate the buried truths of the 41st millennium. Subscribe to delve deeper into the shadows where even the Emperor's light fears to shine. After all, only by facing our darkness can we truly understand what we've sacrificed in the name of survival.